But the silliest part of all is why people just let it spin up. You know, in every show it appears in, they stand there, they hold it out, and it goes. Vroom, 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 vroom. Hey everybody, welcome to, I guess, kind of a special episode of Nerd Legion in that control has been turned over to me. You can see I've changed the overlay a little bit. We're in the Millennium Falcon now, which is appropriate because we're talking Ahsoka. I've got the controls in front there. You see, Monte has been exiled to, where are you right now? Tahoe, right? Or something
I'm
like
in
that?
Tahoe.
Yeah. He's currently homeless and shooting this on the road, so we'll make things work as we go along. But we didn't want to leave you hanging for too many weeks without an episode. But we kind of needed a chance for the show to kind of catch up too, right? So there's been 3 episodes of Ahsoka and Monte. Now we get to talk about them. Hooray.
I'm excited. Are you thrilled with where Ahsoka is going, DoA?
I am overall enjoying the series. I will say that. I'm liking it. I'm liking Ahsoka with the caveat that episode 3 was one of the worst episodes of television I've ever seen in my life. It was the most boring 45 minutes to an hour, I can't remember, of TV in like recent memory. It was quite bad. But then episode 4 and 5 really brought us back on track to the point where I'm pretty excited about where the show's going.
You know what I like about Star Wars is it doesn't matter who's writing it. It doesn't matter which arc it is. They're just going to do the same things that have already been done in Star Wars over and over and over again. With the sequel movies, it was let's rebuild the Death Star one more time because we hadn't done it 2 times before. We had to build another one effectively. And this time it was let's just take the training sequence from the Millennium
Oh,
Falcon in A New Hope,
but make it
do it,
worse.
but make it worse and do it again. And then also let's take the TIE fighter attack on the Millennium Falcon and just do it again. And then let's cut in some of the elements of Darth Vader at the first Death Star with the same exact camera shots in the cockpits of the fighters with Shin and Marok or whatever his name is.
Maruk? I don't know. The smoke monster from Lost? We'll get to that later. But anyway, yeah, I mean, so we're just going to talk about them in sequence, episodes 3, 4, and 5. This is like the most on track I think we've ever been in an episode. But I think it's been a couple weeks. We're excited to do another episode, I think. But yeah, episode 3 begins with literally a worse version of the Luke training scene from A New Hope, where it's just take that scene. Let's go back and think about that scene in New Hope for a moment, where it's very concise, it's very to the point. It's interesting. It gives you sort of a glimpse of the Force and how it can be used. And now take that scene and stretch it out to about, like quintuple or sextuple the length, right? And then make it much more boring, where turn it into just like another sort of like martial arts. Oh, now I'm over here. Now I'm over here. We've seen not only the scene before in Star Wars, but we've also seen it in other like martial arts films when someone has to learn to fight blind. Like, we've seen this without the Force context as well. And I mean, they put her in a mask that's clearly just a hockey goalie mask with like some kendo stuff stuck on the front. And it's one of the worst props I've ever seen in Star Wars, to be honest. It's like, so everything about the scene is just terrible. I'm sorry. It's so bad. Like, and then then the Ahsoka theme begins at the end of it. And I was like, I wish there was just a skip that button, on Disney Plus, because that scene just did not need to exist at all. We learned nothing because we already knew that Sabine was struggling with using the Force. We already know that Ahsoka has agreed to like start training her again. Like, we can assume this kind of thing is happening without being shown it in excruciating detail. So yeah, that was just absolute throwaway scene. Didn't need that. And then we got into the episode, which didn't really get much better, honestly.
I mean, the entire episode was just that training sequence plus the chase towards the hyperspace gate.
Yeah, yeah.
And the hyperspace gate thing obviously gets more interesting. I
The
did,
Eye of
as you
Sion.
say, yeah, as you say, I did enjoy 4 and 5 as they actually advanced the plot.
Mhm.
But it was just these fighters chasing this ship and then them running straight into the hyperspace gate that's shooting the turbo lasers at them. And I really just don't understand Hu Yang as a character, because he's the one who's always so cautious and is trying to turn things off at the last minute. And in this episode, he's just saying, yeah, get a little bit closer, just get a little bit closer. And he's not the one bailing them out at the last possible second, which is what they've set this droid's character up to be.
See if you can get a little closer.
Are you crosswired?
Closer, please.
And then, of course, they don't actually get destroyed, followed by the most puzzling decision that Ahsoka makes in this series, which is, I can put on a spacesuit with my tentacle head extremely fast, like really fast, in a matter of 30 seconds, which I don't know if it's physically possible to do that. And then she says she's going to go...
Jumped in like that and slid right in.
And so she gets in the spacesuit and then goes outside of the ship, which she says is to distract them. Now, I don't know how this distracts them logically, DoA, because she's still standing on the ship that they're firing at. So their target hasn't changed at all. And she just does some flips and like blocks some of the lasers, but most of them still hit the ship.
There's a Jedi at the wing of the plane.
Exactly. Why would you shoot at her in this circumstance instead of just blowing up the ship, which is also going to kill her? So I have no idea why Ahsoka thinks this is going to work.
Well, I'll tell you why. I actually have an answer for you immediately on this. And the reason is because it wasn't enough to rehash 2 scenes from A New Hope. We also had to rehash, and I'm not even kidding, a scene from episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, in which, Kylo Ren charges Rey with his TIE fighter and she flips over him and chops it with her lightsaber. So we've literally seen this exact thing in the most recent Star Wars film, which admittedly probably not as many people watch because, that trilogy was terrible. But it's another rehash. Like, it's not interesting. We've seen it before. And like you said, the whole thing is just nonsensical, right? That whole space, fight scene just didn't really do anything for me, because we know that the only people that are in any real mortal danger are just the chaff robot / bad guys. It's like the putties from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Like, they're just there to be beat up. That's their only purpose in life, right? So we know they're going to get blown up, but we know none of the other main characters are going to even be touched, obviously. So there's no drama here. And then we get to a point where there is more of a hide-and-seek starship chase scene through the fog around the star whales and the tentacles, and that was a really neat set piece, I thought. I was like, we just could have skipped the whole meaningless space battle and then just had this sort of like hide-and-seek in this neat set piece with these giant flying creatures like in this cloudy sort of fog bank. Like, I kind of liked that scene. That was neat, but that's kind of this whole episode's problem, where it's like there's some cool elements in it, but we just have a lot of needless kind of filler in there too. Like, this episode really felt like they needed to pad things out for some reason. And I wonder if that kind of goes back to the fact that a lot of these series that we see, Kenobi included, would have done better as maybe like a 1 or 2 movie thing, where you could cut a lot of this stuff out and make a pretty tight piece with it. But it has to be a streaming series now, so we have to fill time. And that's what this episode felt like there was a lot of.
I mean, DoA, my biggest fear at this point in time, because we still haven't seen Thrawn yet by the end of episode 5, and that means that he's going to be in less than half the series at this point in time. My biggest fear is that they waste all this time on these fluff scenes that we saw in episode 1 of this show and then episode 3, and that they're just going to kill Thrawn at the end of this series, and so we're just going to get no Thrawn and all fluff.
No. You don't have to worry about that. We know that's not going to happen, because it's already been stated somewhere that the plan is for like an Avengers style team up of all of the post Jedi characters, Mandalorian, all that kind of stuff, meeting up with Ahsoka and Sabine and everything again for like a big showdown series with Thrawn as the big bad. Think of it as like the Avengers Endgame. So yeah, so Thrawn is, as far as I'm aware, Thrawn is in no danger whatsoever in Ahsoka. So don't worry, Lars Mikkelsen will be just fine. He might be dead in The Witcher. He is dead in The Witcher, isn't he? Yeah, he's dead in The Witcher, but he'll be alive in this, I think. Yeah, he'll be okay.
All right, well, that allays my fear. I mean, that's it for episode 3. It was just nothing. It was just nothing at all. So we can actually talk about some of the more interesting stuff, I think, that happens in 4 and 5.
I think we do need to touch on the New Republic scene where Hera chats with the chancellors or whatever it is, like the politicians. I feel like we need to touch on that for a moment, because I think part of making all of this make sense is they have to show the New Republic as this governing body that's kind of dysfunctional. And I felt like they did a fairly good job with that, right? Where the guy that wasn't involved in the war and kind of sat it out, he's more, worried about like using the resources to build the Republic. They kind of want to bury their heads in the sand and not admit that there's another threat out there when they've just finished this big war. So that scene is frustrating as a viewer because you're like, no, there's this big threat. Why don't they understand? But when you think about it from their perspective, it's like they're, up to their like ears in like stuff trying to set up this new republic and cobble this thing together with all these existing empire remnants out there, that the last thing they want is another big thing to have to deal with. So I like that they include that kind of scene because it makes the rest of it make sense as why our heroes are kind of on their own with this. So I think that's an important scene to kind of include. So in terms of episode 3 value, there it is.
I would agree with you because I do think it's really important to explain why the New Republic isn't doing anything about this threat. However, my counter argument is that they just got off of that planet where they were attacked by Imperial loyalists and a hyperdrive was stolen, in which case there is actual probable cause for them to at least send some amount of resources to track this down, because it's not theoretical. It's not in the shadows. We literally just saw the sequence where the characters were themselves attacked on a core world in Corellia. So it doesn't make a lot of sense that they would just abandon any kind of investigation when they have, I would assume, a massive military. I mean, they have trillions of people who could be going out and investigating this thing. You would think they would send at least a scouting mission, maybe just to go take a look at what's going on.
I think that's where like the bury their heads in the sand thing kind of comes
all
in.
Right, but this is again, you're just interpreting what they're doing and not making it logical.
I'm trying to understand it, right? I'm trying to be the avatar, because I am the avatar of the fan that wants this desperately to be good. So I am fully prepared to admit the flaws, but I think that is there where within the context, a Star Wars fan would know that. Now, that said, what you're about to say is that a big Star Wars fan is kind of left in the dark with this and it makes not much sense, which you're totally right.
I did appreciate that they addressed it, though, so I think they get half a point from me from at least trying to cover plot holes, even though if you think about it for 2 seconds, it doesn't actually hold up. But I agree that that scene was important. I just think that it could have been done differently and better, if they actually had addressed what had actually happened. And I think this, especially just to jump forward for one moment into the future episodes, they try and address this later at the end of episode 5 when Hera's talking to Mon Mothma on the spaceship, and Mon Mothma is asking her if she has any evidence that this thing was there, which is like completely ridiculous because they not have like dash cams on their spaceships in the future. They literally just saw the hyperspace ring jump into hyperspace. They have multiple corroborating witnesses from the X-Wings that are with them. People died. Do they just not trust Hera, a general, to be credible in terms of her eyewitness account? And also, surely they would have recordings. Hey, DoA, remember when they took the scan of the ship? So they literally have the scan of the ship. And she says, "Do you have any evidence?" And they say, "Nah, we don't." And she says, "Okay, well, then I guess you have to abandon our mission." So it makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, that is a bit more egregious. You're right.
So the problem is that the council and Mon Mothma gets more ridiculous later on, which makes the first meeting look even stupider in retrospect. But when you literally have the scan of the ship, and you could say something like, well, Hu Yang has it, and he's inside the space whale, so they can't get it. But, they could just transmit it to Hera. I would think they would give that to Hera immediately because it seems kind of important.
Maybe they can't transmit it because the whales are really thick. And they're
she would have given it to
so
she would have given it to her immediately. That's like the first thing you would do, right? Is you would say, "Hey Hera, we scanned that giant ass ring, and so here's the scan." And Mon Mothma says, "Do you have any evidence?" And apparently they have no sensor logs of their own. They have no corroborating witnesses. They don't trust Hera, a high-ranking military official, to tell the truth to them or to make judgment calls. They mysteriously lost the scan.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no excuse for that. That I do have to agree with you on. But to be fair, Ahsoka was quite busy during that episode. She wasn't really around to be sending it. She was in the Shadow Realm,
Do you think? Hey,
hanging out
Doe,
with
here's a
Anakin.
question. Do you think
Yeah,
Hu Yang, when he was just chilling there on the planet, would have just given it to Hera?
he's not very smart.
Because considering they don't even know if Ahsoka's alive, you would think that Hu Yang would say, "Hey, Hera, I don't know if anyone else is alive. Here's this scan we took."
That's a fair point. Yeah, I can't defend that. But let's get back on track. Let's get back on track, I suppose. But that is true. Yeah, I mean the whole console thing is just it's falling apart. I'd forgotten about. I actually, well, here's the state of things for me is I forgot that scene happened in episode 5. So yeah, so that kind of tells you how hard that's hitting, I guess. But outside of that stuff, I was very happy with episodes 4 and 5. Episode 4 was called Fallen Jedi, and it dealt a lot, which the title could be referring to Shin and Balin's skull, but it could also be referring to Ahsoka as well. I mean, the whole thing, I think, of these 2 episodes is sort of like, where is Ahsoka in relation to the light and dark side of the Force, right? And she's kind of in the middle, and there's evidence for that both sides. First of all, the best thing about this episode is that things happen. After episode 3, I was worried, but things actually happened in these episodes, so that was good. But yeah, we have good characters doing bad things and bad characters making convincing arguments for why you should join them, which is a good dynamic, I think, to have, well, especially when you're talking about Star Wars and the Force and all that kind of stuff, and sort of the fallout of everything that happened in the Clone Wars and all that. So I really like these episodes. But what's your initial take on episode 4?
So, I think these are generally quite good outside of the massive plot holes that I brought up with the council and them, not believing this mission for whatever reason. I mean, there is a functional reason that we can't have them believe, because it has to enable Thrawn to come back, right? The mission with the hyperspace ring from the Imperial remnants has to be successful, right?
Yeah.
So I'm willing to forgive it because it's setting up a larger narrative. And I think in general, this show is significantly stronger than the sequel trilogy, and it's much more entertaining and it's much more believable, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you touched on this the last episode we spoke on about it, but what I like is that with the collapse of the Jedi Order, everything has kind of gone gray in terms of dark versus light Jedi, Jedi versus Sith, all of this other stuff. And you see people have different motives. And indeed, especially with Sabine, Balin isn't acting in an entirely malevolent way, right? He has his own goals, but he also is a man of his word, as he says at the end, and will take Sabine to go find Ezra, right? So he's not somebody that's entirely corrupted, even if he is genuinely doing things that most other people would not be cool with within the scope of the goals of the New Republic, right?
Yeah, and I mean, he doesn't really kind of like unleash his fury on Ahsoka until he's worried about Shin being injured, where, she throws Shin into a rock pillar and he's like, all right, now you done it. And, that's when
it's so easy to defeat Shin, by the way, after all of that fighting that
Yeah.
happens earlier in the forest.
She's still an apprentice. She's still an apprentice, and I think that's I really like how that character is being portrayed, because you can tell she's very dedicated to trying to be evil, and she's trying to like be the best version of her evil apprentice self. But she also has this feeling of being overwhelmed the entire time too, where it's like she's supposed to stop Ahsoka and Sabine, and then she sees a smoke monster Inquisitor guy get cut down, and then she's like, what do I do? I'm like, well, I'll just keep fighting Sabine, and so she does a good job of being the apprentice that's like being kind of overwhelmed by the whole situation, and so it makes sense to me that she'd show up and Ahsoka would be like, oh no, where's Sabine? And just kind of lashes out, does a very dark side thing, and grabs her and throws her into a pillar, definitely something done out of anger, which is of course like not a Jedi light side kind of thing to do. Then that triggers Balin, and then he obviously defeats her quite quickly, which is like, oh, okay, so he kind of was just sort of messing around with her the entire time, which is kind of makes his character cooler. Which, man, it sucks that we have such limited time with Ray Stevenson this role. Assumably that that is probably just this season and that's it, because man, what a great character. Like I hope they had a end for his character planned in this season already, because it would be really tragic to just have to kind of write him off the show, because the actor passed away in real life. But man, he is like crushing it in that role. He's so good at just being that Jedi that's like, he's just doing his thing, and he will do dark side things or light side things if it gets him to that objective, but he doesn't want to hurt anyone that he doesn't have to hurt, you know? So
it's unfortunate that we won't see him, but his character, obviously there are ways you can write yourselves out of these situations. You could basically Darth Vaderize him and use a body double and, you know, have him in a mask, which would not be unusual for the Sith, obviously, and then do some sort of, you know, voice modification so you still get the same character. You could do some other kind of transformation. Think about what Terry Gilliam did in the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus when Heath Ledger died, for example. He basically turned the Heath Ledger character into 3 different actors, right? So there's very creative ways that you can get around some of these scenarios, but it does feel
recast him. You can just recast him too. As bad as that sounds, because Ray Stevenson is so good in this role. Like, think about you know, Dumbledore and Harry Potter. They had to recast him, obviously, and for some reason I'm not able to think of the actor's name right now. But
Richard Harris.
Yeah. So he was great. Obviously, then he passed away, and then they did replace him, and the new actor did a fine job. You know, brought his own spin to it. So I don't think there's anything wrong with recasting people. In fact, I would love to have Luke Skywalker recast in his Mandalorian appearances instead of just CG face Luke Skywalker. Like, it's very good CG, but it's still not convincing enough to me. You know, I would rather see someone, and you're denying some actor out there a chance to be in this role, which I think is kind of unfortunate too. You know, like, let people have a chance to take on these characters and see what they're going to do with them. You know, I think from the craft of acting standpoint, it's really too bad that we're not getting more recasts. I mean, we recasted Han Solo. Why can't we recast, you know, Leia and Luke too? Why do they have to have CG faces? But anyway,
why can't we just have new characters? That'd be my question.
That's true. But if you're going to bring them back, just recast them. But you know, I do like that we are getting some new characters in this, right? I mean, Baylan Skoll's new, Shinati is new. The Rebels characters are, you know, they were obviously in that animated series, but they are new characters overall to the Star Wars universe. Right. So yeah, that's another reason why I like this as a sequel trilogy replacement, right? Because we're doing something that feels much more Star Wars. We're continuing on the original trilogy in a more logical way, and we're doing it with new characters, which is pretty cool. We know the other ones are out there and they're doing things, but we don't necessarily need them in the story. But man, I've got so many good things to say about this episode.
But one thing I want to bring up is that, first off, this episode is very interesting in terms of aesthetics, and what I liked about 4 and 5 overall, and I'm sure we'll get to, is that the fight choreography was extremely good.
Yeah.
And we got to see a lot of different flavors of you know, combat, which was interesting. But before we start that, it's funny to me because I started in the last episode discussing how this reminded me a lot of a spaghetti western and the way that it was shot and the kind of cinematography decisions that are being made. But what happens in episode 4 is this just goes full Akira Kurosawa, and those samurai films have been, Lucas has said repeatedly that they have been a very big inspirational point for Star Wars as a whole. But you really, really see it here, including just straight rips out of samurai movies. So let's talk about like the Kurosawa influences. Not only the cinematography, but this looks like they're fighting in a cherry blossom forest. So it visually evokes those samurai movies instantly. You get Ahsoka's, not only her lightsabers, which look like Japanese swords, including, you know, the katana and the smaller sword that I think it's called the wakizashi that samurais use in combat. So she uses the 2 swords. Her fighting style is obviously very reminiscent and draws a lot of inspiration from Japanese sword techniques. And then on top of that, you even have direct visual references to Kurosawa movies. So in the film Sanjuro, which is the sequel to Yojimbo, so it's one of the many Kurosawa films that stars Toshiro Mifune. At the end of Sanjuro, the last scene is a duel scene where Sanjuro, they stand there and they do a single strike across each other, and that results in his enemy spewing this massive burst of blood out of him, which is a very iconic film scene. And they basically do that exact same scene with Marok and Ahsoka, where they stand there for a second, get into their stance, and then it's the single strike that shoots all that gas out of Marok. But it looks to me like a 1-to-1 copy of that scene from Sanjuro. And what's interesting is that scene in particular was never meant to happen in the original Kurosawa movie,
right.
because it was supposed to spew just a little bit of blood, but it ended up just like spewing an epic amount of blood. And it was so ridiculous and iconic that Kurosawa kept it in the film. And then that informed, obviously, Kill Bill Volume 1, where they did that.
Countless animes, like that.
Countless animes, Ninja Scroll, like basically all of anime. So it was an accident that caused that huge blood spurt to happen.
It's a prop malfunction.
Yeah, it was a prop malfunction. And then that came out later on to basically influence all this anime and all the cinema and even this. So it's a really iconic moment in film history. But because it's so iconic, it is kind of ridiculous if you know film history that they use this, because it's a straight rip. It's a straight rip.
And I think there's the thing is I'm more forgiving of something like that, because that feels more clearly like a small homage, right? It doesn't take very long. It's it's done well. Whereas the other things we talked about in episode 3, you're just copying entire scenes, and you're doing
and
it
from
in
the same
way.
franchise too, not from a film that's like 70 years old, right?
Yeah. So I think we need to differentiate that, the utilization of inspiration from other films is executed in a very meaningfully different way between that scene and then the stuff we were talking about in episode 3.
But they also just, even the music goes like full Japanese in a lot of this. You have the fue, the Japanese flute. I think I heard some shamisen in there. I definitely heard like the taiko drums and everything. So they really are pushing the Kurosawa parallels, which, I like Kurosawa. I'm a huge fan of Kurosawa, so it doesn't bother me, and I think it really works in the context of this show. So I enjoyed those elements of it. And to your point, I didn't mind the rip of that scene, but it is just really, really obvious if you know what you're looking for. What I did mind was Marok's incredibly stupid helicopter blade that he turned on right before he died.
Why did she wait for him to spin it up? I mean, clearly that's so. In case you're not familiar with it, the Inquisitors were a group of dark Jedi that were recruited by Darth Vader after Order 66. Some of the Jedi he was able to bring over their side, and they were used to hunt down the existing light side Jedi. So, and they all had this double-bladed spinning lightsaber, lawnmower thing, which is kind of silly. But the silliest part of all is why people just let it spin up. In every show it appears in, they stand there, they hold it out, and it goes. I'm like, why are you waiting? Why are you waiting for this? Just go in and hit him. So yet another instance of that. But whatever. I'm just.
It doesn't matter because she instantly wins the fight. So clearly it was a bait. It was a bait by Ahsoka.
Yeah,
she knew what was going on. Also, the Inquisitors are in the Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor games. They're major antagonists, and they're great.
And the Kenobi show too. Yeah. But I don't have any idea what Maruk is. Like, that is a piece of Star Wars lore that I am completely unfamiliar with. What is he? Is he a smoke monster? Is he just like a bunch of bugs filling up a suit? Like, I have no idea what that character is. I'm glad it didn't turn out to be Ezra in disguise, as we were a little bit worried about earlier. But I have no idea what that character was. I'm gonna have to look it up, because I just don't know. Is he from Rebels? Who knows? I have no idea. I haven't watched the last 2 seasons of Rebels. Anyway, but he didn't, and I'm a little bit sad we didn't explore more of that character. But who knows? Maybe he's going to come back. Maybe he can, as a smoke person, maybe he can put himself back in the suit, and they can like duct tape that up, and he'll be just fine. Who knows? I have no idea. But yeah, so he's theoretically dead.
He's not dead. Let's be real. He's not dead.
Yeah, you could totally bring him back, I guess. But I
There's
don't
also,
know the lore. I don't know the lore, so.
There's also an interesting parallel here, which has to be intentional, which is Marok is the name in Arthurian mythology of a guy. He's like a wolf knight. He's kind of like a werewolf. So he gets turned into a werewolf, but Morgan Le Fay, the famous magical Arthurian antagonist, is the one that taught I'm trying to remember, guys, taught somebody to turn him into a wolf.
Okay.
And Morgan is Morgan Elsbeth. So they're clearly making some Arthurian name references here, which I think is interesting. Where that's going, and if it goes anywhere, I don't know, because it hasn't gone anywhere yet, but it definitely could go somewhere.
That's a good point. Yeah, it might just be like a little nod to that, or it might be something bigger. But Speaking of like Arthurian type stuff, I liked the difference in styles between Ahsoka and Balin's Skull, where his is very like knight in armor, you know, medieval looking lightsaber style. And the thing with their fight on the map platform, first of all, it's a beautiful set piece. Like both of these episodes are just so gorgeous to watch from
well done.
You know, the entire way through. I have to add in a little caveat that I love the big slow shots of the Rebel fleet with like Home One and all that. Oh, those always get me. I love the big ship shots. But anyway, back to the fight. It's been, I feel like it's been so long since we've gotten a good lightsaber fight where the lightsabers feel like they have weight behind them, you know? And you mentioned the fight choreography being very good in this. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I think that's a big part of it, is that we're taking things, we're slowing things down. You feel like the characters are actually trying to hit each other rather than just, you know, do some sort of choreography session and all that. And there's a distinct difference in the choreography in terms of the skill that's on display between Balon and Ahsoka and Sabine and Shin, right? Shin and Sabine, they both kind of look like amateurs, honestly. The way they do the choreography, they're both kind of flailing a little bit more. There's more of a frantic element to it. They both kind of know the forms, but they're not as practiced with them. I feel like you can kind of see that in the fight. Whereas then you look at Balon and Ahsoka, like these are two masters, right? They know exactly what they're doing. Everything is done with intent. There's no... you know, there's no flailing or, you know, panicking or anything like that. So I really liked the distinct difference between the fights, because it could have easily just all been one big mash of light swinging, you know. But they did a good job of making those fights feel, you know, real and heavy and meaningful. So
yeah, and I really appreciate the different styles that we see from the various characters as well. Like, it's very cool to see the integration of blasters into Sabine, which, if you guys have played Jedi Survivor, is one of the lightsaber styles that's in that game, is, you know, one hand with the blaster and one hand with the lightsaber. You get to feel more of the kind of medieval broadsword style that comes out of Balin, and then the more kind of nimble acrobatic two-sword style, that Japanese derived style that comes from Ahsoka. So it's really fun to see the interplay of styles, and you even get to see Anakin style later on when he appears, which is more reminiscent of the prequel trilogies, but in my opinion is more grounded and kind of feels better than all of the flipping around and extra flourishes that they tried to throw into the prequels.
Yeah.
So all of that I thought was really well done and really enjoyable, and was more, I think, believable, realistic. Like you said, has weight behind it. It feels like there's consequences to this swordplay.
I mean, and can we talk about the Force for a second too, and just what a great like exploration of the Force in general this show is kind of becoming, and one of the main reasons why it is such a good proper sequel to, you know, Return of the Jedi is that I feel like we're learning more about people's relationship with the Force in this, right? Because Balin's Skull is actively using the Force not just to throw things around, but to get inside people's heads and kind of manipulate people and all that. You know, when Sabine has the gun to the map thing, and, you know, at first he's like, you should do it. Your master would want you to do that, you know, and he's being serious. He kind of just accepts things as they are, you know. But then he's like, then, you know, you see him pause and look into her mind and then use what he finds there to sort of like exploit her emotions and get her to agree to come with him and all that kind of stuff. And I'm
but
like,
he doesn't betray her at the end either. He
No,
actually
he doesn't.
follows through with it, which I think is very interesting, and it does set him apart from the Sith that we see other places who would manipulate you and then just kill you, right?
Because he's not.
He
He's
says
not Sith.
he says he's a man of his word, and he's
Yeah.
going to do it.
And I think there's a difference there too, where you could say I think there's even a technical thing with this, where you would call them dark Jedi, right? Where they're not Sith.
Yeah.
They don't ascribe to Sith ideology, which is a whole different ball game. That's like the cackling evil kind of stuff. Where this is more, they just don't care about being good. They just want to achieve their ends. Like in D&D terms, you would call this lawful evil, right? Where you are true to your word, you abide by a set of your own, you know, circumstances, but you're not above hurting people or, you know, doing things that seem unsavory to get what you want, right? So, but yeah, he is a man of his word, and he shows that, and I think that's great about his character. But, you know, more than anything, we see a true, you know, master of the Force here too, where he's got both the martial and the mystical, you know, down, right? Which we just don't get a lot of that excuse me, in new Star Wars, right? It's all lightsabers, right? Or it's all like throwing rocks or something like that. You know, we don't get to see the mental element, the mystical element of the Force kind of on display like this very often, which is too bad because it's one of the most interesting things about the whole concept of it. So it's great that we're getting that with this show, you know, and it just makes Bale and Skull that much more interesting too. So, and I love that. Oh, go ahead.
Also, I was going to say that one of the other interesting mythological references that is made here is that Skull and Hati are the names of the wolves in Norse mythology that chase the sun and moon across the sky. So in Norse mythology, Skull is the wolf that chases the sun, which is in a chariot, and then Hati is the wolf that chases the moon. And that's what causes the movement of the sun and the moon in the sky. And basically, they're on an endless chase of these celestial objects until Ragnarok. And one of the signs of Ragnarok is that they catch up to the sun and moon and eat them. And I'm wondering where this illusion is going within this show, in the same way that we talked about Marok and Morgan.
Yeah, because they definitely have a different... Bale and Skull definitely has a different objective than Morgan Elsbeth. She just wants to go grab Thrawn, bring him back, and start a new war and win it. Bale and Skull, you know, the only thing he's really said is that he's after achieving something that would give them unlimited power, you know? So what will he do with that, you know, once he gets it? Who knows? But that does kind of play into that whole Ragnarok sort of theme that you just mentioned. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Sometimes my deep knowledge of mythology is useful.
Yeah, and like I know things like Salacious Crumb has to make Jabba the Hutt laugh once a day or he dies. So that's
what a team
too.
we are, DoA.
I know, right? That's we got it all. We got all the bases covered on trivia night. Yeah. The one thing that I didn't really like that much in episode 4, I have to bring it up, is that at the end when Hera shows up with the X-Wing pilots and all that, she shows up in Ghost and then the X-Wing pilots are there, and the ring flies off in hyperspace. We do see 2 X-Wing pilots die, and no one really ever talks about it. Like, no one really even mentions it or reacts to it. I'm like, 2 people just died. And, like, this seems like a pretty tight-knit group. They were willing to go against the rest of the, you know, the New Republic to join her and all that. And they're just gone. And everyone seems to be like, that's okay.
Really?
Whatever.
That was your biggest problem? So my biggest problem was the fact that Hera took her son on a mission of mutiny and put him in direct physical danger.
Hey,
I would call Child Protective Services on Hera instantly, by the way.
They don't have
She
that
is an incredibly irresponsible mother, because let's think about it. Hera knows. So Hera thinks, I have to go on this mission because there is a dangerous force of Imperial loyalists building up in this system. And she tells her child son, instead of just leaving him on the ship and saying, hey, can you like look after him for a bit? I have to go do this incredibly dangerous thing. She puts him on the ship with her, knowing she's going to go into potentially some sort of battle, to the degree that she also convinces a bunch of X-Wings pilots to come after her. Now, why would you do that if you didn't think there was a dangerous circumstance? Then she goes directly into combat with her kid. She is a crazy bad parent. Holy moly, DoA.
Yeah, there's no explanation besides it's Star Wars and having kid characters is what the kids want. So yeah, there you go. That's fine. He's a Force user. We find out in the next episode. I'm sure if you watch Rebels, you know this. I didn't know this because I didn't watch the last 2 seasons of Rebels, but he's the son of Hera and Kanan, who is a Jedi that trained Ezra in Rebels. So he can use the Force himself. But apparently he didn't get the head tails. He just got green hair, I guess, in the genetics. So.
He didn't even get one head tail.
No,
right?
not even one. Yeah, I don't know. So kind of got ripped off, I guess, in that sense. But anyway, so he's around. I really do. I gotta say, I really like. I'm trying to find his name again because I forgot it. Oh yeah, the Paul Sun-Hyung Lee, or Lee Sung-Yun, the Korean actor that plays from Kim's Convenience on Netflix, which is a pretty funny sitcom that also plays the rebel pilot that we see pop up in The Mandalorian. He's in kind of all the series as sort of a side character, but now he's becoming more of a main side character. And it's fun to see someone that has no connection to the Force. He's not a big hero. He's just kind of a dude trying to do his job, and like his responses to everything are just kind of like, oh, okay, this is happening now. It's like, I'm just kind of, you know, I think this is an important thing, so I'm going to do it. But, you know, he's just kind of so, you know, blasé about everything that happens, to the point where in episode 5, when he's like, wait, how can this kid know this stuff? And she's like, oh, well, his dad was a Jedi. So he's just like, okay.
What am I missing? What just happened?
Jason has abilities. His father, Kanan Jarrus, was a Jedi.
Okay.
Just walk. I love it. I love that character. He is the everyman in the Star Wars universe, which is nice to have, you know? Where it's just, he's just not surprised by
he's
any
kind
of this.
of
Yeah,
he's not surprised. He's been through it all before. He's just gonna do his job. He's the blue collar X-wing pilot. It's great. I actually do enjoy him as well.
Yeah, he's become the first when I saw him show up, I was like, I couldn't separate the Kim's Convenience from the Star Wars there for a while, but he's solidified himself to me as a fun character in these series. I like it when he shows up now. But yeah, let's talk a little bit more about episode 5. So, big reveal at the end of episode 4. Guess who's back? Back again. It's Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker.
Digitally altered Hayden Christensen.
Slightly de-aged, but if you see him in real life, I don't think they had to do too much.
Yeah, he is definitely de-aged though, and they did the smart thing of putting him in the dark, just like they did with Indiana Jones on the de-aging, and having him move in action scenes, so it's less obvious.
He's not old or anything like that. Let me see how old is he? Because I bet he's around my age or something, and I'm not
mid-40s, I would say.
Yeah. He is. Let's see.
You are a boomer, though. I'm sorry.
I'm not no. Boomers are the people that were like baby boomers.
You're a spiritual boomer. We all are.
Spiritual boomer. He was. Oh yeah. So he's 2 years older than me, right? So
yeah.
And so they don't need to do a whole lot with him to de-age him. But there's a little bit of smoothing going on. But they also have to do stuff with his makeup too, because he kind of goes through dark side and light side versions of himself throughout the episode, and this episode is kind of like Ahsoka's examination of her past and her relationship with the Force, and the influence her master had on her, when that master is the person who turned into Darth Vader. So it's kind of the episode is an interesting concept, I would say. And the thing that was most interesting to me that they brought up is that the generations of Jedi from Obi-Wan's generation and Anakin's generation are very different, in that Anakin in the episode brings it up that when he was kind of being trained initially, and Obi-Wan was trained, they were being trained as just keepers of the peace. They would just show up if they really needed someone to go and do it. They were, diplomats and things like that. Whereas now this generation of Jedi has to be soldiers, essentially. And so that brings up all sorts of different, thoughts about what's your relationship with the Force, violence that's involved in that. So I thought that was a good point that I never really thought about, is that there's very distinct different generations of Jedi happening within the prequels and the OT trilogy. So
I also think what's conceptually interesting about this is one of the features of shamanism across a variety of cultures is that you have to have a kind of a near-death experience that you fight your way back from. And that is what is the final stage of becoming a shaman, right? Mm-hmm. Or in this case, realizing the pinnacle of your spiritual powers. And so by putting her in this alternate state where it is very explicitly about she must fight for her life and choose whether she wants life or death and go through this hardship and revisit all of these old memories and come out the other side through victory, is really, really reminiscent of many cultures' shamanic initiations. And so I particularly enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah, it was neat to see, and it was a good journey for that character to go through, because you can tell she's trying to be the wise master, right? But at the same time, she has this sort of conflicted background as well, and she kind of goes through a Gandalfian transition, I suppose you could say, at the end, where they come back, and then she's suddenly in this like white poncho, kind of this white robe, and it's like, now I am Ahsoka the White. I've come back to you now to lead you into the last episode. But or I don't know how many episodes there are, but
I think this was really visually well done, though. I like the fact that they put them in this these walkways in this kind of nebulous star realm.
That's the thing from Rebels, I think.
Okay. It's really good. I think it's really interesting to look at just the visuals of this episode too, with Anakin flipping between the Jedi into having the red lightsaber and then into Darth Vader and kind of masking that in the fog and the shadows is really beautiful. I think they just nailed the visual appeal of this episode. And then also recasting Rosario Dawson as a kind of young teen Ahsoka and showing her relationship and how she grew. And then also having kind of her current knowledge in her younger self and having the conversations about the Siege of Mandalore and everything like that and explaining to Anakin what that was. It's just a really excellent dreamlike interplay. And to bring this back to our other shows, DoA, I wish that this had been what Ciri had in the desert scenes in The Witcher, because this actually felt transformative for Ahsoka as a character, and you could see her kind of reaching the next stage of realization and reconciling with her past in a way that the Ciri episode where she's wandering around the desert was just extremely boring and did nothing, right?
Yeah.
This was a much more successful iteration of that trope.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a really great comparison to make, because one, you have someone wandering around with a unicorn, and then like melee killing a giant monster for no reason, and then with this, you have Ahsoka revisit some very difficult things in her past, both when her master was with her and when he wasn't with her, her dealing with that transition where now she goes back and revisits this with that knowledge of what he becomes too. Like you said, the flashes of him being Vader here and there too are weighing on her, and yeah, it was very, very neat. It was neat to see Hayden Christensen in the Clone Wars Anakin costume and stuff too. They did a good job of bringing him back to that because I did watch the Clone Wars and all that, and they basically just copied everything exactly, and so it was neat to see that in a live action setting, I thought.
I also think it's an interesting exploration that hasn't, to my knowledge, really been done in Star Wars before, where you talk about what is the purpose of the Jedi, and Anakin very explicitly states that it used to be that they were keepers of the peace, but now they had to be soldiers in this conflict. Yeah. And so it brings up questions like, were the Jedi supposed to be utilitarian for the time, or were they supposed to be a timeless order that had a certain ideology which they always followed? And I think you can see in Anakin's character, it was his belief that the ends, we know that it was his belief that the ends justify the means, and that he was essentially a power-hungry utilitarian at the end of the day. And Ahsoka is trying to reconcile that. And I think that she does have internal conflict about whether or not her training has affected her negatively, because she was trained very specifically to be a soldier, to be a combatant, and maybe that has tainted her in some way.
Yeah, and you also have to keep in mind too that Ahsoka was basically kicked out of the Jedi Order too, where she was an apprentice, and then in the Clone Wars she was framed for murder and basically had to go and exonerate herself, and didn't get any help from the Jedi Order. They basically just kind of left her out to dry, essentially. And so at the end, she was exonerated after they had kicked her out. And they're like, well, you can come back now. And she was like, no, I don't think I will. And she just walked away from that too. So there's that aspect of it as well, where the Jedi kind of messed up when it came to like supporting her in a time when she really needed it. And they didn't do that. But it's interesting too, because if you look at like Yoda and Obi-Wan, they probably would have seen the Jedi Order as this pillar of stability and principle that would be unchanging. Whereas then, the Clone Wars happen, and obviously that is like things are different, right? People do have to take on that different role, and that does make and that probably led to a lot of the Jedi becoming Inquisitors and things too, right? So it's pretty neat, and it's like, this is again another reason why this is a proper sequel arc to the original trilogy, because it takes what exists and it expands on that in a philosophical way, in a thought process kind of way, and gives us new characters we actually care about and can see change. It doesn't just dredge up the past. And you look at like what we just talked about with that examination of the Force and the Jedi's role in the universe, and then think about The Last Jedi, where you just have like poor Mark Hamill having to play this like corrupted weirdo version of Luke Skywalker, being like, it's time for the Jedi to end, and he's just like on himself, on an island by himself, just doing nothing anyway, and he's just this curmudgeon-y old man drinking milk straight out of the udder of the giant space cow or whatever it is, So it's like, they're trying two entities, two pieces of media that are trying to do the same thing, and one horrifically fails and one does a very good job. And so I'm glad we have Dave Filoni at the helm Even though he is kind of the king of filler episodes as well in terms of like
He's
a lot of stuff we
also
don't
he's
need.
also
But he
the
gets it.
king.
He really gets it.
He's also the king of writing really terrible dialogue. The amount
Proper
of
spiritual successor to
no,
Mr. Lucas,
no,
I think.
no,
No?
no. The
Really?
original trilogy had way better dialogue than this. The amount of just throwaway lines in all of these episodes is just ludicrous. Especially when they're about to fight, they just say the most random shit that doesn't need to be
Going
said.
somewhere.
Going somewhere?
Exactly. I don't understand a lot of the dialogue that's occurring. Fortunately, the actors are good, so it kind of softens the blow a lot of the time. But
That
I mean,
sounds very
overall,
OT to me, but
the dialogue is just, it's absolutely miserable. And it's much worse than the original trilogy. And especially because the last show that I watched was Andor, which has incredibly good dialogue.
Yeah.
It's very, very difficult to watch this show during. So I just have to plug my ears and just look at the pretty pictures at times.
You've learned how to watch Star Wars. That's good. All right. But did you notice too? Did you recognize young Ahsoka's as actor? That's,
no, I didn't.
That's Ariana Greenblatt, who famously played young Gamora in Avengers Endgame. She's the one who's like, "Oh, what did it cost you?" You know, I recognized right away. I was like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme where it's like that. You know, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I recognize that person." So she has become sort of the default young main character actor in a movie. So
alien actor.
There you go.
In heavy makeup.
Yeah, it has to. I mean, you know, we'll see what the future holds. But yeah, so far she's been very green and she's been very red, or orange, kind of, I guess.
Orange.
But either way, she does a great job. I think she's a great actor, and she killed it as young Ahsoka. So cool to see her back in a strangely similar role to the one she played in Endgame, which is interesting. But that was fun to kind of point out. Yeah.
What I also want to shout out is Rosario Dawson's continuing excellent performance, especially at the very end of episode 5 when she's talking to Huyang about going inside the Purrgil space whale, and she just has this wonderful self-satisfied smirk on her face, and she plays this kind of almost Buddhist amusement and calm so well in this show, and you get this restrained sense of humor and sense of adventure from her that is almost entirely done through her eyes and her face, and it really comes across well. And I think she is just absolutely insane at this part, and this part could be really boring. If this was a bad actress, this part would be, Ahsoka would be terrible. But she really is making the most out of the role, which I appreciate.
She's doing she's bringing a lot to it, but she's also doing a very good continuation of what that character's personality always was. Like I failed to recall really many other, if any other, instances where I saw a character act so much as an older version of that character as you would logically think that character would become. With everything that young Ahsoka went through, because when we meet that character, she's a child, essentially. You know, it's like in the flashback. Goes through all the stuff in the Clone Wars. It always does have that sort of like, kind of humorous edge to it, where she kind of does look at the world through sort of a cynical, humorous kind of lens. And then seeing that develop into sort of like with, wisdom and experience, that becomes what Rosario Dawson is doing as that character. So I think it's such a great logical development of that character's personality too, and you feel like she really understands that character as it appeared in other franchises, and done a good job of being herself, but then also being a good continuation of that character. So I like the care that she seems to put into the role in the character. It really does show through.
I think it's also really difficult to have a show that is based around a character who is primarily an observer. Because Ahsoka is somebody who prefers to just be the one watching her surroundings and reacting to them, rather than necessarily be the one who's taking bold action a lot of the time. And that's really hard to do, I think, as a main character, and they do it very well here.
So yeah, they fly away in the space, or the star whale, I guess, at the end, which is cool. I think it's really neat. Like, talk about expanding the Star Wars universe. Like, it's cool that there's this creature out there that is so big and has this ability to travel through hyperspace. Like, that's neat. You know, why can't we have that in Star Wars? And so why can't you jump in its mouth and do that? I like that. I like that we're seeing something new in the universe. You know, and obviously it was in the cartoons. It was in the Rebels cartoons, but it's, you know, it's new for all of us that didn't watch that as much, and it's cool. Yeah.
I think this is one of the most successful parts of this show because it really highlights the difference between the means of the characters within this show, right? Yes. Because on the one hand, you have everybody having the same goal, which is to get into this other galaxy. And even though some of them want to go there to save Ezra and some of them want to go there to save Thrawn, they all want to go to the same place, right? Mm. And it's the means that is different. So Morgan and her henchmen are trying to build this, you know, find this artifact, get this map, build this fantastical structure, and more or less brute force their way into this other galaxy. And I think what's elegant is, again, Ahsoka is a much more reactive than active character. So after the action takes place, she is then trying to problem solve and uses the much more subtle and light touch of communicating with the Purrgil in order to basically hitch a ride to where she wants to go. And she obviously doesn't know that where she's going. She explicitly states that because the creatures are making that decision. But it's more of an inherent trust and affinity for the natural world. And this also ties into what I said earlier about her undergoing basically a shamanic initiation, which is an animistic, all those are animistic traditions, right? And they're all about communion with the natural world and being part of a larger natural whole. And she then doesn't force the Purrgil to do it. She basically asks permission and is granted it by this creature right before the jump. So I think it draws really interesting lines and themes about what is the proper way to do something and makes a very stark differentiation between how the characters go about achieving their goals in this show, which I think is really good and really powerful.
Yeah. You have the light side kind of being one with nature, you know, sort of fitting into their surroundings, and then you have the dark side brute forcing it, like you said, you know, working through domination and you know, subjugation of their surroundings, you know. And it's you see themes of that in things like Lord of the Rings as well, right? We have like Saruman builds this big, you know, mechanical, you know, empire essentially, to this big war machine essentially, right, to like take over, whereas the good guys generally kind of try to work within the framework of the natural world. Yeah, exactly. The Ents go marching. Yeah. So so it is neat to kind of see that kind of theme pop up again. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention earlier. Do you want to hear the most hilarious like fan theory ever about the show that I've heard? And it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But I saw this floating around that I think it's kind of a joke as well. I don't think I hope not too many people are thinking this seriously, but there's this fan rumor going around that Baylan Skoll is the little boy from episode 3 where Anakin comes in to slaughter the younglings, and he's like, Master Skywalker, what should we do? And then he's like, lightsaber. And then, so people are like, oh, maybe that's the kid, you know? And I'm like, they both have blonde hair. And I'm like, well, first of all, like Baylan Skoll has kind of like white hair now. Are you sure his hair was blonde before that? And also like the timeline does not line up at all for that. If that kid was like 5 years old in Sith, he would have been, you know, he'd be like maybe in his 40s or something now, right?
I think mid-20s actually, right?
Not
like
yeah,
20.
I mean he certainly wouldn't be in his like 60s like Baylan Skoll certainly is, maybe even older, because we know Jedi can you know, live for a while, but so that I saw that theory floating around as mostly as a meme, but I think some people were taking it seriously too, which was hilarious to me. So I had to bring that up.
They probably just don't want the reality, which is that kid was murdered by Anakin Skywalker.
He's dead. He's dead. Sorry. Like all those kids in that room were killed by Anakin Skywalker. Yeah. That's well established. I mean, there's a holovid that Obi-Wan saw of him slaughtering younglings. Yeah, that's my Obi-Wan impression, you know, when he saw the holovid of Anakin slaughtering younglings. But anyway, I just wanted to say slaughtering younglings a couple times in this episode, and I've achieved my goal, so we can move on. But the title of episode 5 was Shadow Warrior, which is, again, I think they're titling these episodes very well, because that label could apply to basically everyone using the Force in this series right now. Is that there's this gray area that exists. So, to kind of wrap things up, I guess it's really interesting where they're going in terms of the journey of all of these Force users right now. Who knows where Shin Hati is going to end up, right? Because she sees her master doing all this kind of stuff. I think we can safely surmise that she's going to lose him somewhere along the way in the near future. And I could see her going either way, going good or bad at this point, depending on, how the story sort of plays out. What's Sabine's role going to be in all this? We would assume she's going to come back around, but now she potentially has a new war that she directly, is responsible for on her hands if they do bring Thrawn back to the main galaxy, which, based on the other Star Wars things we've heard are kind of in the pipeline, sounds likely. So that's going to be a major thing for her character to deal with. But yeah, I feel like we've just got a lot to look forward to with this series. I'm excited about it in a way that I have not been excited about new Star Wars in a while, in a different way from Andor. Andor was just great drama. Andor was fantastic. This I'm excited about in like more of a classic little kid Star Wars-y sense,
Yeah, and I'm just excited that we're finally going to get to see Thrawn, I hope, in the next episode. I've been waiting for this payoff, and I do appreciate the slower pacing of this show where they don't blow their load all at once and we get to see some level of character development. Maybe I would have liked to see not so many filler scenes.
We could have just skipped episode 3. Episode 3, take like the 2 scenes that were relevant in that episode and just stick them at the beginning of episode 4. Yeah, we could have been 1 episode farther ahead right now, but aside from episode 3, I've really enjoyed this series.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. I think they did nail the visuals, and I've been really enjoying that. It's the dialogue that I think really drags this show down in many ways, but I'm willing to forgive it because I do, at the end of the day, find this to be pretty entertaining, and I feel like it is going somewhere, and it has the potential, again, the same thing we said about the first couple episodes. I think it has the potential to be very good once they start to introduce the central conflict. I just kind of wish we had been able to get there a little bit faster, because at the end of the day, Thrawn is infinitely more interesting than Morgan.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how Lars Mikkelsen does, but I would imagine he probably will be. I'm glad that, again, this is progressing like a Star Wars film would. It really feels like a Star Wars film in a way that, Star Wars films haven't felt like since Return of the Jedi, probably. So it's exciting that we're getting to this point where, I think Dave Filoni as well, he's, as the kind of the showrunner for a lot of this stuff, is having to make an adjustment too from the animated world to the live action world with Star Wars. And that's obviously an adjustment that takes time, and you're not going to get it right, immediately. But I feel like things are really coming around for the most part to produce some compelling stuff. And so, yeah, hopefully this is just a sign of good things to come. But then again, Mandalorian season 3 was pretty bad. So I don't know. Maybe it's just a coin flip. Maybe it's just always a coin flip. I'll have to wait and see.
All right. Well, we'll be back to, I think, close out on Ahsoka in a few weeks, and we'll see you then.